The Centre for Social Justice, the well-respected think tank, recommended that the locked hexagon model be adopted in mental health services nationally. This was their first recommendation in Chapter 5 in their publication, Completing the Revolution. That chapter was on the mental health of black and minority ethnic groups. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what the locked hexagon model is, why I developed it, and how it might work for you. Well, the locked hexagon model is a multi-stranded approach to improving outcomes for people from black and minority ethnic groups in mental health services, particularly around reducing the overrepresentation of African Caribbean people in inpatient psychiatric beds. The whole premise behind this approach is that there are 6 key components which need to be in place in a single service delivery system in a change program to achieve the kind of outcomes that we're talking about. The idea is that the absence of one or more of those components has a disproportionately negative impact on the likelihood of success. These 6 essential components are setting targets for improvement in key areas, having service users involved in shaping services, using narrative approaches and explanatory models, the promotion of training, education, volunteering opportunities for service users, the engagement of communities and carers, and the development of staff and the managers of frontline staff. Okay, so let me take you through each in turn. Well, the first is about setting targets for improvement in key areas. Well, this really builds on the principle, begin with the end in mind. So in your local area, you might, for example, choose a target of reducing the admissions of African Caribbean people by 5% over a 2 or 3 year period, or reducing the number of repeat admissions, or Section 3s, for example. And then you'll ask yourself the question, if this is what we want to achieve, what do we need to put in place in order to achieve that kind of outcome? Then next, we move to the engagement of service users in shaping services. Now, of course, you'll notice I'm not talking there about service user engagement or service user participation. Specifically, it's about shaping services, and this might well be challenging because it will focus on redesigning services to meet their needs. It might mean a shift from very traditional and orthodox ways of doing things, but actually, if we really want to bring about the outcomes we're looking for, we might need to make those kind of changes. Then next, we talk about the use of explanatory models or narrative approaches. This is sort of developed from a lot of research looking at how the stories of people's lives can help us find solutions. So, for example, people might have experiences in their lives that they see as contributing factors for why they've got the presenting problems that they have. Or they might be able to tell us about some of the characteristics that could well be enabling factors in building resilience, helping them through their current problems, or helping them have the resilience to face off other challenges that might arise in their lives in future. The focus on the promotion of opportunities such as employment, education, volunteering, and training is really a chance to give people structure to their lives, which is well researched to suggest a very, very good way of maintaining good mental health. But also, of course, with the structure comes the increasing sense of self-worth, the opening up of new social networks, and that is seen as a key contributor to positive mental health. The next strand is looking at the development of staff and their managers. And again, you'll note that I don't talk about training. Training is often presented as the answer in reports that identify knowledge and skills and attitude gaps for staff and the workforce. But actually, we do know that there are other ways of developing the staff, and in this austere climate, releasing staff to go on training programs might not always be an easy thing to do. But you could do shadowing, learning groups, consultancy groups, or staff could even undertake the process of a reflective journal. and through that process develop their own skills. And finally, the component we're going to look at is the engagement of carers and communities. So yeah, communities and carers can be a useful resource in helping us to understand where people go, why it is that sometimes services are seen as alien, and why there's a barrier in terms of people approaching us earlier. These kinds of pieces of information can be really useful in helping people to develop their own networks, maybe even investing in groups and solutions in the community so that people aren't leaving their problems or their crisis onto the critical stage before approaching mainstream services. So why did I develop the locked hexagon model? Well, when I was working as an executive director in a mental health trust, I secured some funds from the National Delivering Race Equality Programme, and I ran what was called a focused implementation site. And within that, I undertook some research to identify good sites where I could find examples of practice, and there wasn't much out there. And what transpired was that actually across the country there were episodes of little good examples here, maybe a good inpatient group, maybe a little community arts project, but it was clear that in no locality would you find all of the key components which are required to achieve success. And as I was doing the research for my book, Working with Ethnicity, Race and Culture in Mental Health, I realized that this wasn't just about a problem I was finding, there was this clear gap. And we in the trust then reviewed our cases, spoke to clinicians about what they'd find useful, spoke to service users, and also gathered as much evidence about effectiveness as possible. And from that, the locked hexagon model was born, because I realized that what we really needed was an evidence-based approach that focused on having in the single service delivery system all of these key components to bring about success. You see, we can't rest on our laurels. The variation in terms of the overrepresentation of black people is still pretty gross. If you look at the standardized ratios in the national minimum data set, so for those of you who are not clear, 100 would be your kind of baseline, your average. For white people, the admission rates are at 85.62. For black Caribbean, it is 321.85. That's the level of overrepresentation, and there is this imperative that we must do something. So, what can the model do for you? Well, many leaders in mental health services say that they're not sure what to do in order to solve this overrepresentation. Some even say that, well, all that's happened is that mental health services are picking up the results of discrimination and inequalities further downstream, for example, in education, employment, housing, and discrimination in society. So how might it work for you? Well, what we know from research undertaken by Professor Swaran Singh and colleagues in a paper on the use of the Mental Health Act 1983 that was published in 2007 demonstrates that once people come into services, yes, there is the overrepresentation at that stage, but as they progress through, over time, things get worse, and it indicates that we in mental health are better at keeping white people out of services than we are at keeping black people out of services. And if we're struggling to make a change, maybe it is just that the locked hexagon model will provide a solution to what appears to be an intractable problem. Information about how to implement the locked hexagon model can be found on the resources page at www.hsconsultancy.org.uk. But please feel free to email me at contact@hsconsultancy.org.uk. I'll be happy to discuss with you how we might be able to help you implement this model in your organisation. Thank you very much.